Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So I'd like to welcome everyone this evening. So a few days ago, when we were doing the meditation course, afterwards during the question and answer, the subject of personality types and these different personality types we have in Buddhism came up. So I thought maybe I would. There seemed to be some interest in it, and you can only talk so much of it during question and answer. So I was thinking I'd maybe speak about it a bit this evening. So, um, uh, as most people may know, in in modern psychology and in different forms of spirituality or self-help, there's all these different personality types. So I believe Enneagram has 9. Modern psychology has all different types, and so there's always these different ways we can break up our personalities and kind of categorize people by personalities. And I'm not saying any one type is more correct than the other type. One of the things with how we do it in Buddhism is this is specifically related to our practice, and these personality types are specifically related to how we practice. So the whole concept of these personality types, as far as I understand, really came into prevalence during the commentaries. So there's this very very well-respected commentarial book called the Visuddhimagga, and it was written hundreds of years after the time of the Buddha by a monk named Buddhaghosa. And then there was another one, and I think it predates the Visuddhimagga, called the Vimuttimagga, and it also is a commentary, kind of a summary of Dhamma practice, and it also speaks about these personality types. And so um, it's uh, it's good to remember that um, uh, so these don't actually come from the Buddha, but they're very inspired by stuff found in the suttas. And especially from what I've seen in the Thai forest tradition, we still use these and people use them as a way to practice. But it's always good to remember, like with all the other teachings of the Buddha, they're all specifically pointed towards ending suffering and reducing suffering. So using these is we use these personality types as a tool to help us out and to help us understand ourselves. So there's 6 personality types. Well, there's a whole bunch more because there's combinations and stuff, but there's 6 basic personality types in Buddhism, and they're grouped in pairs, um, like of similar ones. So you'll say there's the first ones you have what's called loba. The personality types in Pali are called charitas. So and in Thai we usually just say charit. So you'd have loba charita, which is a greed type, and then you'd have Satta Charita, which is a faith type. And these two are usually grouped together because there's certain similarities between them. And then we have another pair. We have what's like Dosa Charita, which is like an anger or aversion type. And then we have the other one in the pair, which is called Buddhi Charita, which is like an intelligence type. And then in the third set, we have what's called Moha Charita, which is a delusion type. And then we have Vitaka Charita, which is the speculative type. So, and so these are the 6 basics, but then you can get into all like combinations of all these different all the different combinations that you can imagine and you can think of with these. But it's always good to remember that all of us have all of these in us. We all have them all to a certain level with us until we become enlightened and have removed greed, hatred, and delusion from our hearts. But before that, we all have all of them, just in different combinations. So if someone is, say, a greed character, it doesn't mean they've only got greed in them and they're devoid of anger or delusion or faith or speculation. We've got it all in us. And so with these different personality types, it's something which is encouraged in a lot of the Kruba Ajahns, like the meditation masters and stuff in Thailand, the enlightened teachers, the very senior monks. They do encourage us to get to know our personality type, but it's not something which is taken. At least from what I've seen in my experience, it's not something which is taken like um, uh, really overly serious. So, like, I know some monks who just not really interested in it, don't know their personality type, or most, it, but it's not like this really, firm thing. Okay, we're going to move all the people we think are anger types over to this side of the room and segregate them out by their different types and stuff. It's not like that at all. It's just when we get to know these and get to know our types, it's really to help us with our practice and just having this awareness of ourselves and of our minds and getting to be aware of how our minds work. So, for example, you see with athletes, like really like peak performance athletes, like Olympic athletes or professional athletes, they really get to know their bodies. So they really know everything about their bodies. They know when they're exercising, they'll feel some pain and they'll know, okay, well, this is the pain that I can keep pushing through. But then they'll feel a different pain and be like, okay, this pain, I know this pain, I can't push through this pain or I'm going to injure myself. Or if they feel a certain sensation in their ankle, they know, okay, I need to stop, I'm hurting it. Or if they have hurt one of their joints or something before, they know to be careful around that. So it's also with us, when we're practicing Dhamma, especially in the beginning of practicing Dhamma, we really get to know ourselves, we get to know our minds, we get to know kind of what makes us tick and how we react to things. So for example, you you get to know, okay, I've got that say for something like aversion, okay, I've got that feeling there. I feel kind of irritated, so I know, okay, this is me, this is a me problem today. I'm going to be a little angry, and so I have to be more careful because I am in a bit of a grumpy mood. Or you might go into a certain situation and might know, okay, these certain situations, these ones get me really get under my skin. These ones really get me angry, and this is like a real pet peeve of mine. So we get to know our minds like that, and it can be with all things too. It could be like, okay, these, walking by some kind of fancy bakery really gets my cravings going, really gets the greed going. I want to get those fancy pastries. So we get to know our minds like that and get to work with it, and getting to know these different personality types and these different characters will help us do this. And so I won't go into too much detail on the uh, all the ways to identify it uh, here, because there's quite a few, but we have to identify it for ourselves. Or a lot of times, if we have a friend or a teacher, they can really help us with this. But it can also be difficult because like with a lot of these emotions, and I talk about quite a bit, is we sometimes don't see what's there all the time, what's predominantly there, because it's there all the time. So we're quite used to it. We don't see it. A lot of times we see, what's different, and we see. So when we may have just anger there all the time, or some low level irritation there all the time, but we don't notice it. But then when something like greed pops up, or something like scattered thinking pops up, we really notice that. And so we think, okay, well, I must be greedy because I can see that greed. So there are these different ways to identify it. So if anyone really wants to look into the Visuddhimagga or the Vimuttimagga, they'll get more into it. But so for something, for example, like wearing your robes, they say someone who is a greed character wears their robes very nicely, very evenly, not too tight, not too loose. They say an anger character, they wear their robes really tight and not always so even. And then a delusion character, they just wear them pretty sloppy. And so it goes through this with the way they walk, the way they sweep, the different characters. But it's always good to remember that if you're trying to identify these different characteristics, sometimes we can have a learned uh, character trait. So, even though, say, we may be a delusion character and normally would wear our robes really sloppy, when we get maybe living in the monastery, we're really taught and trained you have to put your robes on really nicely, and so uh, we've developed this characteristic not of our personality type. And so it's always good to remember that. And so and it's really interesting because with these different personality types, like we may think, okay, an anger type, someone who means someone is angry, they're just angry all the time. We hear that and we think, okay, it's like, rageaholic or something, or someone who gets the road rage and needs anger management. But with all of these, they're actually quite a spectrum. So even though you fall within a certain category, there is a spectrum within the category. So if you're an anger type, there can be those people who are just like, we've all seen in life before, who are just like those explosive, angry people who are just, you can see it on their face a mile away. They're just always angry, always losing their temper, and just really out of control with their temper. But you can take it all the ways to the other spectrum, and it could just be like you're someone who uh for an anger type is just, you get irritable very easy, or you can get frustrated more easily, or sometimes you just have this very low level kind of irritation you feel. So it can be within quite a spectrum, or just a lot of times it's just easier for that anger to get to to come up, to arise. So it can be the same like a greed character. Sometimes, we think again a greed character is just like, gluttony and hedonism and sensual indulgence. And it can be like that. But also on the other spectrum, it can be someone who actually has really refined tastes. And so you can see someone, when they make their cup of coffee, they really make sure to get it all, just right, time it all out right, get just the right amount of milk in it. Or even the more refined ones would never ever put milk in it, and so there's quite this spectrum. Or something like, the speculative, the more of the delusion types. Again, on one side it can be just, they're just so um indecisive, or so many doubts and worries and delusions that they just can't even function in life. But on the higher end of the spectrum, it can just be someone who has a lot of varied interests. So again, with all of these, their spectrums, we have all of these different characters in us, but we will have like certain predominant ones. And it's really good not to get really like judgmental. So it's one of the things I would like. Whereas people, when they pick it up, they pick it up very lightly. It's not, okay, I'm an anger character. I'm like this, oh, this is terrible. Life is going to be like this, or like this. So it's um we have to be really careful not to kind of force ourselves into a box, like, okay, I'm this character, so I'm going to be like this. And or this other person, he's this type of character, I think he's an anger character, so he's always going to be angry, it's always going to be this. Or two, we misunderstand and think, okay, say I'm an anger character, then I never have to worry about greed. But you do, greed can come up for everybody. We have all of these in us. So and it's good not to get discouraged with them, because sometimes you hear them like delusion type, you're like, oh man, if I have a delusion character, how am I ever going to become enlightened? That's the opposite of enlightened. It's you know but it's not like that. Like, I remember years ago, I was living at a monastery with a very respected Ajahn who has the reputation that he's enlightened. And there was one monk, and he was a Western monk, and he went up and was asking him, about personalities and stuff, and the Ajahn said, well, you're actually a speculative type. You're the Vitaka Charita, like so it's closer to in that delusion pair. And this monk was kind of worried about that. He's like, well, can I become enlightened then if I'm a speculative? Is which is a speculative response. And he's like, can I become enlightened? And this Ajahn was like, oh yeah, of course you can. And he was saying, actually, Ajahn Chah, like Lumpur Cha, he was a speculative type. And he said that's why Lumpur Cha had so much wisdom, was because he had so many doubts. So he had to um, develop all this wisdom to overcome his doubts. So it can be that way too. Say where someone's an anger type and they're really working on it, they may just develop, just heaps of loving kindness to overcome that. And so when you meet them, maybe you do just encounter that loving kindness side to them. And but it can be very informative when you do start to, figuring out your personality type and how you respond to stuff. So if, for example, like we were doing body contemplation the other day in the meditation class. So sometimes people, especially people more in the aversion type, the anger type, the dosa charita, sometimes these are people are ones who uh, when they do a lot of body contemplation, might get the grumpy moods the next day. Not saying it's exclusive to them, but they are the ones who it's more likely to, or just and so sometimes also it can be really helpful for picking your meditation object. You might be like, okay, okay, actually I realize I'm someone who has a lot of greed in me. Maybe I need to be doing some more body contemplation. Or maybe I'm someone who has a lot of anger with me. Maybe I should be doing some more loving kindness meditation. But again, like I was saying, you're not, even though you have this type, it doesn't mean you're like put into a particular box on it. So it's not like, okay, I'm a greed type, so I never do loving kindness. You can absolutely do loving kindness. You can do breath meditation. So it's one of these things that there can be that drawback of we get when we think about it, we get too narrow on it and too narrow with what we expect from ourselves or what we expect with other people. And so when we are, we may be like, okay, I've got to do more loving kindness meditation, but we've got to, we can do all the other meditations as well. Um, and so, but we can just use this to become aware of ourselves. And and it's also, it can also be sometimes fun. I used to know this one monk, and he was very interested in personality types, and it was always funny watching him when you'd have someone new and he'd be trying to figure out what personality type they are. He's like, well, he does this, so I think he might be a greed type, but he does that, so I think he might be an anger type. But it's also it's also good not to coming back to the whole like not giving unsolicited advice. So it can be good not to just go up and tell people like, I think you're an anger type, because a lot of times they don't take that very well. I found out the hard way when I was a junior monk. I and the monk did not agree with me, and he got very angry about it. And so you have to be careful with that, because we all have our own sensitivities. And um and so yeah, it's just it's something which it is encouraged to kind of get to know about yourself. And you might say, okay, I'm a more of a faith person, and or I'm not more of a faith person. And you can see this in life. Say, for example, with like faith, that's a very easy one. You see some people just, they just, part of their character is they're naturally moved towards faith. They can believe a lot of these things easier. Faith is much easier for them. But then you see other people and say faith is very difficult for some people. Some people have a lot of doubts. They can't make those leaps of faith. Or some people, have um, a lot of really critical thinking. And so yeah, there's these. So these are just kind of a brief overview of the personality types that we do use in, at least in Theravada Buddhism. I don't know if they're used in Mahayana, but I would assume they are. And that, but that doesn't mean you can't uh, use other personality types too. I know one person, and he's German, and he was very much into the Enneagram and the Enneagram personality types. And he was able to use this to help him with practice. But he said, you just have to make sure when you're doing that to view those through the lens of Dhamma instead of viewing Dhamma through the lens of these other things. So I would like to offer that as a bit of reflection for everyone this evening.